I'm not running for anything. The job growth is going to come in our country from small business, where 2/3 of the growth always is, from clean energy, from bringing back manufacturing, and from infrastructure that we can pay for. Okay, so let's just stop. That's the job growth. Where's the money going to come from? If we can't do another stimulus because we have to borrow the money from overseas, is there any money there? You bet there is. The banks of America have $1.8 trillion in cash now. They got well. And that's a good thing. Otherwise, the economy would have collapsed. But they got the money in the bank that's not being loaned. We have to figure out how to get it out there. That's more than enough to take America, and the world for that matter, out of this recession. The third thing is, how can we be absolutely sure that if we create these jobs, we've got people here who can fill them? Here's an interesting fact. Today, there are 3 million jobs that have been posted, that is, I want to hire someone, that have not been filled for some time. If they were filled, the unemployment rate would be 2 points lower than it is. 3 million more people would be working. Now, why is that? Well, some of the employers are being picky because they are not really sure they're ready to hire yet. It's a little bit. The workers aren't as mobile as they used to be because more than 10 million of us live in homes that are worth less than our mortgages, and we can't leave where our credit's toast and we're fried for a decade, right? But the main reason is there's a skills gap there. So there may be 50 people apply for the job, but maybe none of them are trained tool and die workers, and that's what you need. Okay, so let's just go through those things. Maurice Hinchey, let's go to the jobs, has voted 40 times in the last 21 months since we took over in the hole for various tax cuts to help small businesses and manufacturers to create jobs in America. There is a bill pending now that would extend the credit to up to 30% for small businesses to create certain kinds of jobs, and the tax credit, and that would give support to small business to induce community banks, who didn't cause this problem, to loan them money. Now, that's his position. His opponent's position, and the Republicans, to be fair to them, they have been very honest. They put that agenda out, or pledge, or whatever that pledge they call it, and they said they are against all of that. The answer is just to have to permanently extend the temporary tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans. It costs $700 billion. That's their position. But they're not for any of these Democratic specific targeted things that help small businesses get a foothold. Second thing is, he voted for the stimulus and every other effort to put America back in the lead for a green energy future where there are millions of jobs. One example of what's happened because of that. When the president and the Democrats united began in January of 2009, we had exactly 2% of the market for making the most modern batteries, which are necessary to have super efficient hybrid cars or all electric cars. By 2014, if we keep going with the programs that are now underway, we will have 40% of the world's markets in the batteries necessary to take us into the future. And then you've got all these things that Binghamton Center for Autonomous Solar Power and all these other specific to this district projects that are related to the energy future Maurice voted for. His opponents, crowd say, they're going to repeal the rest of the stimulus, destroy our efforts to attain world leadership in green energy, and kill the hundreds of thousands of jobs that will still be created. They say the stimulus didn't work because it didn't get us out of the hole. Oh, yes, it did. Yeah. It did work, but it didn't get us out of the hole. How come? The hole was $3 trillion deep. The stimulus was $800 billion. 2/3 of the stimulus was not designed to get us out of the hole. It was designed to help you swim so you didn't drown while we were getting out of the hole. 100 million families, 100 million families, 100 million families with modest incomes got tax cuts so they could buy food and keep the grocery open. And state and local governments got money so they wouldn't have to fire more teachers and more healthcare workers and make it worse, because as you know, they can't deficit spend. Now, in New York and lots of other states, it wasn't enough to offset all cuts, but it helped an enormous amount. Only about a third of this, about $270 billion, was designed to create jobs. And that money is being spent out and invested still. Every independent analysis said it created more jobs and saved more jobs than they thought, somewhere between 1.5 and 3 million, and the unemployment rate would be 1.5 or 2% higher if that stimulus hadn't passed. Their position is to repeal the rest of it, which will raise taxes on 100 million working families and kill jobs. He wants to keep it and see it through. They want to get rid of it. I don't think this is a close question about what's better for the jobs of America. Let's talk about the financing. Maurice was talking about credit cards and Wall Street banks. They just passed a bill. They just passed a bill which says we're going to have oversight of the Wall Street banks and try to free up the community banks. But the Wall Street banks will no longer be permitted to engage in these risky job-killing schemes, and from now on, all future bailouts are prohibited. That's what the bill says. It passed. That's the law. Now, why is that a good thing? Because before this happened, one of the big Wall Street firms, Bear Stearns, had $34 at risk for every dollar in cash it had. The local banks have about $10 at risk for every dollar in cash they have. That's a safe margin. If you keep the lid on them, then they'll have to loan money the old-fashioned way to make it, to create jobs or expand jobs or start new companies or take companies public so they can expand more. They will create jobs the old-fashioned way. And the community banks will have more help. In addition to that, as I said earlier, the Democrats have offered credit guarantees and loan guarantees to try to give the banks more courage to start lending again. The Republican position is to repeal that. So, because all government regulation is bad by definition, that's their position. So we'll repeal it so those guys can go back to the risky job-killing loans and make bailouts more likely, because they say we're going to crater the economy. This is not a close question. That alone, their position to repeal the oversight bill, which also contained everything he'd been fighting for credit card reform and will save people $5 billion in unnecessary, unjustified credit card charges that used to be there. Their position is, we want to repeal that. I say we should keep it, and to keep it, you got to keep Maurice Hinchey. Here's where the students need to listen real close. This is the biggest deal of all. So there's 3 million empty jobs, right? What we need to do is every month give every governor of every state in America a report on the jobs that have been vacant for 3 weeks or more, and the money to train people to do it. And the training can be done by community colleges, by training programs funded by labor unions, or by the employers themselves. We have a labor commissioner in Georgia, an African-American running for the Senate, who's running the closest race against an incumbent Republican anybody in the South is running, because he runs a training program. And every month, he calls around and finds out who doesn't have the trained workers. He sends the money right to the employers. The people go in while they're still drawing unemployment and not starving. Every employer in the state loves it because they save money on the unemployment trust fund because people get off unemployment quicker. That's what we ought to do for America. The Republican budget, depending on which analysis you believe, calls for an immediate cut of somewhere between 25 and 50% in all education and training money. So who's more likely to put those 3 million people to work? Maurice Hinchey. This is not a closed question. Now, here's the most unbelievable thing of all for the college students. Here he is killing himself to try to get you all this high-tech, energy-related employment for the future, all these businesses, right? When the most disturbing economic statistic most Americans don't know is that in this decade we fell from first in the world, for the first time since World War II, to ninth in the percentage of adults with four-year degrees. Even more troubling, we fell to 12th in the percentage of young adults with four-year degrees. Now here's what will knock your socks off. We're still first in the percentage of young people going to college. So what happened? Why are they all quitting? Because even before the financial collapse, college costs had gone up 75% after inflation, and young people were scared to death that they couldn't pay their debts, or they had to borrow more money and couldn't borrow it, and they were petrified. Moreover, even those that get out were making job decisions based on their debt obligations. So somebody gets out of medical school, say in New York, and owes $250,000, which is not unheard of. They might want to go to rural New York and set up a family practice where you desperately need it, but they'll never be able to make enough money to service their debt. So they do a residency in a specialty, and they go to the city and they make a ton of money, and they do good. But meanwhile, the rural areas don't have the doctors. Why? Just so they can service the debt. There are all these people that might like to go be teachers for 4 or 5 years in poor areas and help kids in trouble, but they owe $50,000, and they know they can't service the debt on what their pay will be. I'm telling you, this is a huge issue. So what did he do? He passed a bill, and the president pushed it and signed it, that nationalized something I did on an experimental basis as president, and then President Bush canceled. It said that the education department would stop paying huge subsidies to banks to make loans they should have made anyway, set aside their own reserve, and make the funds available directly to the universities. When we did that, so I know what this does because I did it. When we did this, it lowered college repayment costs for young people, $1,300 for every $10,000 they borrowed. And most important, they could pay the loans back as a percentage of their income. Now, every single student in America who gets a college loan can do this. This is revolutionary. We will soon be number one again in the category that affects our economic future the most. Because think about this. None of these students here, if they have a student loan like this, the loans will be easier to repay, they will cost less, and you will save $60 billion in lower costs because the default rate will go to nearly zero, and you won't be paying subsidies that aren't necessary. That's what they did. Now, what does his opponent and all those other people, what do they want to do about this? They want to repeal it because the people that pay for their ads want their subsidy back. So they don't ever run ads that say this: vote for us, give us the majority, and we'll make it more expensive to go to college, harder to pay your loan back, and increase the debt by $60 billion. But that is their position, and on that issue alone, you should vote for Maurice Hinchey. Now, one last thing. Let's talk about this debt. They actually put out a budget.